Yeah, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the session of the Nečas on Continuum mechanics. Our today's speaker is Professor Lukáš Horný from the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering of the Czech Technical University. And I've seen him for the first time at a seminar in the Faculty of Civil Engineering when he gave a talk about rupture of aorta. And it was so nice that I asked him to give a talk at our Nečas seminar. And I was very happy that when he agreed to do so. And I think this will be again the topic from some biomedical modeling, and we will be very happy to learn something new. So, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much for kind introduction. First correction, I'm not a professor, perhaps one day, but not here. So the topic of my presentation is mechanics of nonlinearly elastic tubes and the consequences of the axial prestretching of these tubes from the point of view of biomechanics. I work at the Department of Mechanics, Biomechanics, and Mechatronics of the Czech Technical University, Faculty of Mechanical Engineering. And let's jump immediately to our topic. Yeah, maybe as first, my presentation will have three parts. One will be some introduction to basic physiological knowledge associated with the phenomenon of the prestretching of tubes, so in this case arteries. Then we will follow to see some experimental results obtained in laboratory with tubes realized as arteries and veins. And then in the end, I will show some theoretical results associated with this. So in the beginning, what is the prestretch, what I'm talking about? So this is the situation, how it is seen by the medical examiner when there is autopsy of a body. And also similar situation would be experienced by surgeon. If a surgeon cuts artery, its ends pull out each other. Yeah, so and in case of the medical autopsy, when examiner search for the case of the for the cause of the death, he opens body and cleans out all tissues, and we see here abdominal space, and I'm not experiencing this kind of pointer. Yeah, abdominal space, and there is branching of renal arteries, abdominal infrarenal aorta, and there is branching to left iliac and left and right iliac, common iliac artery. We measure the distance between marks in situ in the body, then cut out and measure again outside the body, and we clearly see that it retracts, yeah, as it is seen here in this picture, and we can define prestretch, longitudinal prestretch, as the ratio between the length in situ on site and the reference length at ex situ. So this is basic everyday experience in surgery or in autopsy. This value of the prestretch, the amount of the prestretch could be significantly high. For example, this is the description of our data we collected in approximately 3-year study. It is based on approximately 400 observations, 400 autopsies. Then my colleague measured this prestretch, and in young population we see that it is approximately about 40% of the prestretch, so it is elongated for 40%, and it decreases during aging as a consequence of general age-related changes in our body. Every blue point is one autopsy, and it decreases to totally diminish, we say about years of 90 age. Yeah, this is the expectation regression regression curve, and there are intervals, confidence intervals of the 95% percentage of for the future observation. So, and we can assume that this decrease is because of atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis, and you can see it here in these pictures, is a very common disease. Almost everyone it has. This is to see the contrast. This is the healthy aorta with intact, clean inner surface. And this is the aorta with ruptured lesion. And this is the example of totally ruptured plaques. These black areas shows places where plaques ruptured and blood clots aggregate there. So this is the most advanced stadium of atherosclerosis. So one could have hypothesis that the reason, the cause of this decrease is atherosclerosis. However, and this is the clear correlation between atherosclerosis and the age. Yeah? Again, the data showing axial prestretch measured in autopsy, and every point indicates degree of the atherosclerosis from 0, which is negligible atherosclerosis, to 4, which is the most advanced plaque, and you see that it clearly correlates with age. And what I want to say is that this is just masked correlation between age. Likely, atherosclerosis is not the most important fact which would explain why axial prestretch decreases. This is the way how we will find what is responsible in our body for bearing the prestretch. Yeah. So this is the age-adjusted analysis of the previous picture. Say, let's concentrate on age interval from 34 to 46. Again, groups with respect to the degree of atherosclerosis and analysis of variants, and in this case based on the Kruskal-Wallis test, showed that the degree of atherosclerosis is not a good factor explaining differences. So we have to look into greater detail to the composition of our blood vessels, to our arteries, and this is the histological picture showing staining with respect to different constituents. This is the inner surface of aorta, and this is the external surface of the aorta. So there is the tunica intima as the first innermost, the thinnest layer. Then it follows with tunica media. There are muscle fibers and elastic membranes, and then after so-called external elastic membrane, the tunica adventitia follows, which is predominantly collagenous structure with fibroblasts responsible for response in overload. And the physiological pressures and the physiological loading, the most important with respect to mechanical loading, with respect to the stresses sensed in the wall, not with respect to the blood flow, and not with respect to the friction force caused by the flowing blood. But with respect to the mechanical stresses inside the wall, the most important element inside the wall are so-called elastic membranes. They are indicated here. What is between there are muscle fibers, which are oriented in the circumferential direction. And these elastic membranes are responsible for bearing the most important part of the load. And these membranes are vulnerable to be damaged by fragmentation by elastolytic enzymes, which is also the consequence of aging, and we refer to it as arteriosclerosis or sometimes elastocalcinosis. Another result that suggests that for carrying the prestretch are responsible elastic membranes are experiments with genetically modified mice. These are results collected in the team in the United States by Jessica Wagenzel in St. Louis in Missouri. And we will compare wild-type mice. Here we see electron microscope picture of the vessel wall, and to mice which where was the gene responsible for synthesis of elastic membranes knocked out. So they are knocked out, and elastic membranes in the result are not present in the wall. So, and we compare geometry, how it's developed in growing body of the mouse. This is wild type, nice striped tube of the aorta. However, in comparison with this genetically modified transgenic mouse, we see that it is curved, tortuous. So the element which is responsible, however, again, this is just indirect evidence. Yeah, it only suggests that, because in fact we don't know what is responsible for bearing the prestretch, but all the results we collected so far suggest that the most important are elastic membranes in the wall. Another indirect evidence that suggests that elastic membranes are responsible are local differences in the prestretch as we measure it when we mapped the values of the prestretch along the length of aorta from the heart to its the most distant part to the bifurcation. So in this picture we see comparison between amount of the prestretch measured in the infrarenal aorta, this olive green, and amount in the prestretch measured in the left common carotid artery. And what is the difference is the number of elastic membranes inside these valves. And now I see that the results, I can show you the results collected in experiments with other animals. This is the big aorta and comparison to the dog aorta. And again, we see from the root of the aorta in the heart, it starts, the measured value of the prestretch starts in the value of approximately 20% of the prestretch. And it gradually increases to the bifurcation to the value of approximately 1.5 of the stretch ratio, so 50% of the prestretch of the aorta. And similar results for mouse level. Skip them. And now, what is important? So, as the aorta goes from the heart to the more distant places, clearly it is tapered tube, so it decreases its cross section, decreases its thickness, and also the number of elastic membranes present in the wall decreases. So this is the cross section area. However, stretch ratio increases, and if the cross section decreases, and when we realize that this is stretched tube, so net force carried out by the aorta must be the same in all places along the aorta. So this is the so it bears constant force, as is indicated in this picture. So when we adopt this hypothesis, it seems to be from mechanical point of view very, very, very clear. So we then, and assuming that although cross-section decreases, but structure of aorta changes only in changing dimensions, but the elementary unit of the arrangement inside, which is one medial unit, I have shown one previous picture. This is this one medial, or we can say muscular elastic fascicle or medial lamellar unit, and it creates the most mechanical, most important part, the tunica media. So if this decreases, it clearly leads us to the conclusion that if there is still one value of the force carried out by the decreasing cross-section area and increasing prestretch under the assumption of the constant elastic modulus. Yeah? If we assume that the elastic properties are approximately the same with respect to one elemental unit which is just repeated along the length of the aorta, we clearly see that we can explain increasing prestretch by decreasing cross-section area and the decreasing number of elastic membranes. So it suggests us what is responsible in the arterial wall for bearing the prestretch. So now we have seen what is the prestretch, and let's go to mechanical role of the axial prestretch of the tube. So we will see two arrangement of the experiment or theoretical ideas. One is the open tube, which is pressurized under constant length. Yeah, so this is the reference state. Then we apply some axial force to extend the tube to its loaded length, the format length denoted L. We need to apply some force to achieve this state, and then we keep it at the same axial position and pressurize. Typically, we can do this in experiment as an open tube. So, and what we have seen in the experiments, this is from literature, very old, it's from 1988, from Weizsäcker with right abdominal vena cava inferior, and the experiment. This is the relationship between axial force and pressure. So we start from the zero pressure. First, we elongate it to the pre-stretched length, and then pressurization follows. So, and we see here, this is the pressurization at the length of 56% extended in comparison to the reference state. And in the upper, it is 1.98, so it is approximately 100% lengther than reference state. And what we see, when it is pre-stretched, say to small amount, to low value of the pre-stretch, the relationship between axial force necessary to keep it at the same deformation is decreasing. However, when it is pre-stretched to some big value of about 100% of the original length, the relationship between pressure and force, the force necessary to keep this extended length increases. So, and somewhere in between, you can see value where it is approximately constant here, see 1.84, for example. The same result with right thoracic aorta. The picture is somewhat more complicated because we see two independent behaviors. This is on the left side, it is the relationship between pressure and external diameter. So external diameter really, as a consequence of the increasing pressure, it increases. And on the right side, it is the dependence on the axial force. So these lines, these curves correspond to a relationship between pressure and external diameter. These horizontal curves. Sorry, I'm not so skilled with this pointer. So this is these are the values of the axial force. So we see that when the aorta was pre-stretched about 14%, yeah, and there is a start of the pressurization. The pressurization we indirectly read from the external diameter. So as external diameter increases, force decreases. And when the aorta was pre-stretched to 1.37, so approximately 40% of the original length, the increasing internal pressure led to increasing force. So the axial force carried out by a longitudinal press tube is non-monotonic. Yeah? We see that the response of the tube depends on the value of the original axial pre-stretch. Now, let's look to the closed tube and imagine that we have a tube which is, for example, during experiment, hanging on some support, on some crane, for example, and we put some weight hang on its lower end, yeah, and induce some constant press-stretching force. Yeah, in experiment, probably this will be like realized like a closed tube. So this is the original case, and the second case is that this is the reference state. This is axial prestretch state after applying some weight, some axial, constant axial mass, and according to gravity, some force. And this is the pressurized state. So we should assume that axial deformation will react to pressurization, and the force will be kept constant, and instead the axial deformation will be variable during the experiment. This is the case of our laboratory setting. So these are pictures taken in our laboratory. You can see this is the artery. There are some marks to be visible in pictures because the deformation is usually find through post-processing of the recorded photographs in some edge detection algorithms. So, and these are typical results recorded during such experiment. Yeah? We see pressure and vertical axis, and on horizontal axis we have axial deformation. And we start from the beginning. There is a non-prestretched tube, and it reacts to pressurization by elongation. Yeah? Reacts by elongation. Now imagine that we will have some significant amount of mass on its end, and we, in this case, it is approximately 10 newtons, so approximately 1 kilogram. It is pre-stretched before the pressurization. It is pre-stretched with significant amount of the pre-stretch, approximately 90% or 80% of the original length. And now pressurization follows, and what we see that instead of elongation, as was seen in the first example of the time course of the experiment, we now see shortening of the tube. So again, it reacts. In the first case, it was about monotony in the force and its dependence on the pre-stretch. And in this arrangement of the experiment, it is not about the force because force is constant, but it is about axial deformation, which is non-monotonous with respect to applied pre-stretch during the course of the pressurization. The same, these results in the previous picture were obtained with the carotid artery, and we just what equations say about this. Improve it. Okay, I will continue. So the material is incompressible. It explains this indeterminate multiplier, which must be determined from boundary conditions. The results of simulations I'm going to show you are from the one strain energy density example, exponential type. This is written in the components of the green strain tensor, and it is in the polar cylindrical coordinates. This is Funk type strain energy frequently used in the cardiovascular biomechanics, which is clear that it is an isotropic model. And there are equilibrium equations, again, thin wall approximation, so Laplace equation, and equilibrium in axial direction, which has contribution from the pressure acting on the plug in the tube, and also pre-stretching force, and radial stress is considered to be zero. By combining constitutive equations and equilibrium equations, there are three, but we have to use this one to determine undeterminate pressure P. We obtain two independent equations of the problem, and we can solve. We have 4 unknowns: force, reduced axial force, applied in the experiment, also, of course, also the pressure, and the other 2 unknowns, which are here, axial deformation and circumferential deformation. Results I'm going to show you are calculated for the prestretch set to be non-prestretch tube, 10%, 20%, up to 40%. First, this is calculated in 2 steps. First, we must calculate necessary axial force to prestretch the tube, and then we calculate results to the pressurization or response to the pressurization. There are parameters of the Messier model, reference dimension. It is according to an article, so it corresponds to real human being measured in the laboratory of the Professor Labros, and we will pressurize it up to 18 kilopascal. And here are the results. Left side is the dependence of the applied pressure on the circumferential deformation expressed as the stretch ratio, and right picture is the dependence on the axial deformation. When we start with the circumferential deformation, it is still red curve corresponds to the non-pre-stretched state. Yeah? So we did not use any force to pre-stretch the artery, and we see that we obtained some nonlinear curve as was our expectation here. But what is interesting that there is different shape of these curves, and we will see it later. Now to this axial deformation, we see again that it is non-monotonous. The model reacts to the pressure first by shortening, then it is followed by lengthening, and we see that these curves are also, they show that prestretch reduce axial deformation, and this is exactly what we had known before our results. It was assumed in the literature that the main purpose why our body developed these pre-stretches is because we need to keep it during physiological pressure cycle at approximately constant axial deformation. Yeah, because there is no space, no room to move axially when the aorta transmit pressure. So we see that, of course, this assumption is in accordance with the results of the simulation. What I have indicated here is the interval of physiological pressure. So for us, in vivo, this part is not so important because we have never experienced it. But during physiology, or in our physiology, it is about loading from 10 kilopascals to approximately 16 kilopascals, which are some population and aging averages. So we see that applying pre-stretch, which is approximately this green curve, what I have to remind you that we are talking about the results of the simulation for 38 years old, 38. So it is approximately here, and we see its expected pre-stretch is approximately 16%, 1.16. So something which is more close to the green line, and we see, the green line makes axial deformation in the physiological loading almost negligible. It works. However, what was our surprise when we studied this picture? This is the relationship between pressure and circumferential deformation. So it immediately shows us the distension of artery, because circumferential deformation, it is the ratio between deformate radius and reference radius. So, and now compare capacity for the deformation or variation of the deformation during pressure cycle. Again, let's concentrate on this interval from 10 to 16 kilopascal, and there are cross points are indicated in the picture, and this is non-pre-stretched artery, no pre-stretch, and the variation of the distension or of the circumferential deformation and compare it to the variation, to the length of the interval of the circumferential when the artery is prestretched. It increased the capacity to be stable in axial direction, such, of course, very good for everything, especially every movement has also some energy which is dissipated. So only no movement is the not necessary to move. It is better to do not move. Yeah? But there is another consequence of the prestretch. It makes it more distensible with respect to some amount of available applied pressure in the hole. And now to the third part of the presentation, something about consequences on some theoretical considerations of the role of the and we will start by studying Alan Neville-Gent hyperelastic model. This is the strain energy density function expressed here. Mu and Jm are material parameters. This is the logarithmic form of the energy, and it is the so-called limiting chain extensibility model. So it means that there is some value that this is not defined for all deformations, but a subspace of or subset of the admissible deformations given by the argument of the logarithmic. Depending on green strain tensor, so it belongs to the family of so-called Nell models. And here are the results of the simulations of the pressurizations. Again, there are some values of the, and what you can clearly see is the line that separates responses. Okay. Clearly, there is what we call axial deformation. Again, it starts when it is pressurized. This is dimensionless pressure. When it is pressurized, significantly prestretch it. We see how we can derive it, and this is the idea with this picture. How we can derive derivative of the pressure. When we take inversion relation, we see that we can think about derivative of the axial stretch with respect of the axial deformation of the axial stretch with respect to pressure, and then we will make interchange between pressure and circumferential deformation. This is for the incompressible material when we already substituted or eliminated dependence on the third radial stretch ratio and consider problem as only two-dimensional strain energy density and do not take into account shear strengths. So the strain energy density will be now treated only as a function of two independent variables. And if we use implicit function theorem, a relationship or some binding, some bond which binds axial and circumferential deformation together, it can be reduced axial force. This is the derivation of the expression which we use. It is this starting from thick wall tube and then used to mean value theorem to obtain expressions for thin wall approximation, and we will apply this derivative to this effect, and we obtain this equation. And if this equation has root, real value of the axial deformation, independent, this is the equation with respect to lambda z, and if it has a root independent of lambda theta, then it is exact inversion line. This result was known and derived by Raymond Ogden approximately 20 years ago. That should also add to my explanation. And this is the picture, what we can obtain from the simulation. So it directly corresponds to the previous pictures of the pressure deformation dependencies, and we see it in the phase space of the deformation. So axial deformation, circumferential deformation. There are traces of the pressurization at a given axial prestretch. These dotted curves correspond to curves of the constant pressure. Again, it is dimensionless pressure with the mu in the expression of the strain energy density. And we see that this line divides responses to two different parts, shortening and lengthening, and this thick curve is the border of the admissible deformation according to the argument of logarithmic function. So this result was known before our start to studying this problem, but we concentrated more on biomechanical properties on biomechanics and applied this research to the strain energy density frequently used in the biomechanics. This is so-called Holzapfel-Gassrer-Ogden model, Gerhard Holzapfel, Christian Gassrer, and Raymond Ogden model. Well known in biomechanics, it is a strain energy density which combines Nell-Hook term with exponential terms, which contains two preferred directions in continuum, and you can imagine that it corresponds, at least at first approximation, to the internal structure of arteries. There are two helically oriented preferred directions. So, and when the same analysis is applied to this strain energy density, we see that these models, usually used in biomechanics of arteries, do not show inversion point as a global separation between responses, between shortening and lengthening. But on the other hand, this is the connection, this curve connects points of the indefinite derivative. Here, this is the place where the slope of the tangent to the pressure axial deformation, dependence is indefinite. So it corresponds to the situation when we consider that the results of this condition, of this equation, are dependent on the lambda theta, on the circumferential direction, and we will see in the next slide that it is still interesting, although it does not show clear separation of the behaviors. And this is connected to another, so it was about axial deformation, and now let's look to the volume, because we are talking about artery, so we accommodate some volume. So let's study what our equations will show us about possibility to accommodate some amount of volume. So we will work with the relative volume. So it is just the ratio between the volume of the pressurized cylinder with respect to reference cylinder. We will again use the Finvold approximation of the pressure dependence in the. We are asking about some optimum, about some extremum, but not with respect to the pressure and circumferential deformation, but with respect to the volume accommodated, relative volume accommodated in the pressurized tube, and if it has something to do with applied axial deformation. So it is the condition of the extreme. And we see, and we were surprised, however, when we had found it, we were surprised, but now it seems to be clear as a consequence of the use of genes, that exactly the same point, which in the Gent model between responses with respect to the axial deformation to the applied so shortening the same value of the prestretch tube, the most distensible at the given level, at the given amount of the pressure. Yeah. We found that the same value, this clearly see, maybe not as good in this picture. This is the dimensionless volume and its dependence on the applied dimensionless pressure. But in this picture, this is dimensionless pressure and axial stretch. Yeah, we calculate traces in the phase space with the time terms of the pressure, and these dotted curves are traces of the constant pressure. So that in the constant pressure, we see that the maximum volume in the tube, and again here, maximum volume at a given pressure, maximum volume at a given pressure, is achieved exactly when the tube is inflated at the axial prestretch corresponding to the value of the prestretch when the responses are separated to the shortening and to the lengthening. We apply the same analysis to models which more corresponds to arteries, and they, yeah, because we have known from previous results that they do not separate totally these responses, but we verified numerically that again these places, when we inflate and pressurize the tube at the values of the axial prestretch, that exactly corresponds to these points where the tangent, where the slope of the tangent to the pressure axial deformation behavior. So it again follows the situation. From the physiological point of view, we see that it would be for our body the perfect situation to develop to the state when it is possible to follow this behavior, and we have experimental result that more or less it does. And the last one, 3 or 4 slides in my presentation, I was still talking elastic, but there is no elastic tube in reality, not in our body, not in industry. So let's see what differences we will obtain when we apply some energy dissipation and when we analyze it with the simplest possible way. So we adopted some model of the viscoelasticity. It was a quasi-linear viscoelastic approach introduced by Yuan Fang in 70s. There is the most general description of the model. This is the second Piola-Kirchhoff's tensor, so it is expressed in the material description to avoid problems with the objectivity of the time derivative of the stress. This is the Colombo function with of the generalized relaxation function, and this is for all the tensor in the most general approach, and this is the elastic part of the response of the material, and this is the nice property of the model that we still can use hyperelastic material substituted into the viscoelastic equation and obtain viscoelastic approach. So what we did, we used this as in case of the Gent model and calculated what happens in viscoelastic manner with our tube. So all relaxation processes are separated from these elastic processes. In this way, you can see that it is rather simple model, but on the other hand, we can obtain very interesting results. So this is the setting we used in the simulation. This is the cautious stress. Inside is the, we used the decoupling with respect to the deviatoric part and heterostatic part of the stress. Again, used the assumption of the incompressible material. And there is reduced relaxation function, deviatoric elastic stress, and then time integration and convolution and time integration, and finally transformation into the Eulerian picture. This is just the equation showing how we can obtain elastic deviatoric part. This is the repetition of the joint model, and this is the simple form of viscoelasticity adopted to other model that corresponds to the standard linear solid with one elastic spring and one muscle element. And what are the results? When we think about open tube, so this is the tube which is extended and kept at constant length, so we must apply some force to hold it. And what see? So we use the joint model with the same material parameters. So we can assume from or expect from elasticity that separation, the inversion line, was at the value of the square root of the 2, so approximately 1.4. And what we see, and this is interesting, that this property of optimization of the volume in this problem is present. Of course, I cannot say that this is the proof of this that this property is always kept or always present in the viscoelastic theory, but in this specific setting, yes. So it was our surprise that it can be transformed to the viscoelasticity. With closed tube, I want to point out specifically the dependence on the rate of the problem. Yeah, so first we have to consider that there is some speed at which all mechanical processes happen. So we have in this picture comparison between fast pressurization and slow pressurization. The problem is about reduced axial force, so we apply some constant mass or constant weight to the vertically hanged tube and then pressurize. With also accounting pressure acting on the lower plug. Yeah, and this is this upper row is the fast pressurization. Yes, this is always it is about 1 second to extend it to the final value of the hanging mass. One second, yeah, and then pressurize to some value of the dimensionless pressure. This is the slower behavior. Again, 1 second to then pressurization falls. So in the pictures we see the comparison between elastic response and viscoelastic response. Dotted curves correspond to elastic and solid curves correspond to viscoelastic. Maybe that in this case of the slow processes, because we give longer time to ore dissipation to take place in the material. So we see interesting point. This is again the loss of monotony in comparison to the elastic response. Yeah. Here this part was that in the elastic response, it always, from the beginning of the pressurization, it was followed by elongation of the tube as a reaction to the pressure. Then this part of the response was shortened. Yeah, and here we see, okay, this is right part of the picture. We see that responses which originally were shortening now extend, yeah, elongate. Then there is some inversion and shortening falls. So loss of monotony in this response, which was the consequence of viscoelasticity, similarity of the volume. Yeah, there is the dependence on the normalized volume on the normalized pressure, and we see, yes, something interesting again happens. There is some response which shows us the highest volume in the relative volume in the tube, but now it is not the response which is associated with originally elastic behavior, yeah, because this is this one green, yeah. But we see that it is probably something. This is the red one, yeah. The highest amount of volume is achieved in the red response. So, and when we compare the responses, so we can realize that what's going on. This is the response which remained without the effect of loss of monotony. This is a hypothesis. Yeah, we do not have any proof for it, but numerical results suggest that the property of optimal volume is still preserved, but it moved from, in elastic case, from clear separation these values to the situation where there is some other assumed border between monotonous and non-monotonous behavior. So, to conclude my today's presentation, we have learned that our arteries grow axially prestretched, and that it is beneficial from physiological point of view that axial prestretch almost stable in axial direction when they transmit the pressure pulse. It also makes them more distensible by applied pressure. So it is also beneficial or advantageous from point of view of the amount of or volume of the blood transmitted in one pressure pulse. What we also see that the axial deformation during the pressurization may not be monotonic, and it has interesting consequences for the response. And that inversion pointing axial deformation appears to correspond to the state of maximum related volume of the tube. And the last one, that viscoelasticity does not ruin everything. It preserved many interesting phenomena which could be beneficial in industry or in our physiology. So thank you very much for listening. That's it.